Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This is an open debate and very interesting debate. We will discuss on what was the best invention in 21st century. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Professor Rob, and Professor Donald. And you know that they will attend next year, June 29, a very special debate. And world famous debater they will attend in that debate program, and it will be show debate, and how they motivating, especially through their debating skills to our audience. It's actually very impressive because our speakers actually bring many insight of the developed world, especially from different corporation, from different research lab, and from different innovation lab. So hopefully through today's debate, our youth communities, especially from Asia, they will learn a lot of things. And I request all of our audience, please share our content, because these are the very important model, debate model today we are introducing. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Smith for define today's debate.
Well, Sharif, thank you. I've given many talks about where the future of technology is, and one of the things I've noticed is there are many different definitions of technology. So I went to the dictionary here and pulled out the four definitions of technology that are in the Webster Dictionary here. And they are the science of practical industrial arts and applied science, a method of achieving a practical purpose, or this last one just is really a great one for me. The totality of the means employed to provide the objects necessary for human sustenance and comfort. The reason I put this up here is so many of us, when we hear the word technology, we think technology has to be a thing. But if you look at the definition, the technology goes well beyond it being a thing, even though we will go ahead and talk about those in the debate today. The definition I like to use, though, is the application of knowledge to objectives. And to me, that encompasses the four that are out of Webster's pretty well into a single statement. But what I want to do is one last slide before we get into this. And right at the turn of the century, when we were leaving the 1900s and going into the 20s, a survey was done where they reached out and surveyed a little bit over 50,000 people. And they were taught, the question was, what was the most important technology of the prior 100 years? And that was a time of great innovation. I mean, if you think about it, that was when you saw space flight. That's when you saw computers invented. That's when you saw the nuclear age start and all the other things. But again, this was a large survey done with a group of people. And the results really might surprise you. These were the top 5 items of the most appreciated technologies of the prior 100 years. The microwave oven, the universal remote control, garage door opener, the telephone answering machine, and the air thermometer. Even though that was a time of great technology growth and invention. And if you go back to the definitions I had of what is technology and think of this, you can begin to see that most of those are things which solve practical purposes and really work into that way. So to me, just beginning to look at what are the important and appreciated technologies, it's useful for me to begin to use that type of definition as we look. So, Sharif, let me just get off and let others get on the stage now, and I'll come back with mine as kind of they go through it. But I think this is just a way to help open up the minds of the people who are listening to the broadcast right now.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Rob, what is your speech for today's parliament?
Sure. Looking back at the last century, at least according to Computer World, the most important technology was the transistor that was transitional to an awful lot of the products that David Smith highlighted, and was transitory to our conversion to computers and personal technology, which of course we have all over the place. One of the difficulties we've got is picking a technology in the 2020s that will be the leading technology at the end of the century. The transistor came out in the 2040s. So the people in the 2020s would not have, and the 1920s would not have known about it or been able to select it. So it's very likely that the most important technology for the 21st century has not been introduced yet. But being able to work with things that are introduced, I can't say I can't argue just that the most important technology is something we don't know. It would be fun, but probably a very short conversation. So what I'm going to come down on is autonomous machines, not just autonomous cars or aircraft or weapon systems, but I think autonomous machines will have the greatest impact in this century, and they are largely this century's creation. The initial work with DARPA began at the beginning of the centuries and beginning of the century, and really didn't get to the point where it was viable until after 2000. And that was the kind of the seed corn that's developed everything else. Everything from the autonomous drones that are currently being used in the Russian-Ukraine war to the autonomous vehicles that are currently in test in most countries in the world as we speak, and the autonomous aircraft that have begun tests in Colorado and Dubai a couple of years ago. So the technology has proven to be viable, and whenever you can replace a human with a machine, and a machine that can increasingly do as well, if not better, than the human could do in that same space, then you have the opportunity for disruption and significant disruption at that. Well, a lot of companies are certainly working to have, at least initially, autonomous machines supplement humans. We're talking about the 2020s now. We get to the 2080s or 2090s. We're clearly going to be at the point where we're going to have large scale displacement, and managing through that will be incredibly interesting and probably very disruptive for the people that are living at those times. The ability of autonomous machines to do things better, faster, cheaper than humans also becomes something that emerges as we get to the second half of the century. Right now, autonomous machines don't perform particularly well, surprisingly enough, at the low end of the spectrum. That's where a lot of us thought autonomous machines were going to come in. But people, surprisingly enough, are very cost effective at the low end of the market. Autonomous machines perform better against much higher salary rates. You can justify the cost much better. And now much of the effort to take autonomous machines forward are focused on skills that are much deeper and much more highly valued, which justifies the price of those machines. The penetration of autonomous machines is still relatively light against the opportunity. We're looking at things like autonomous trucking, which is in test right now and broadly objected to by the truckers union, even though we're hundreds of thousands of drivers short of what we need to move goods around the United States, let alone the world. Autonomous ships have been tested and found to be viable. It's just a curiosity point. It would be far easier to do an autonomous ship than autonomous car. Same thing with autonomous aircraft, because there simply are a lot less unknowns coming at you when you're in the air or on the ocean than if you're on a street. There are no children running across or pets or a lot of the other things that cars need to avoid real time. Ships just need to keep out of areas that are relatively well known in terms of shoals and shallow water, and their ability to navigate and cheaply, safely, and economically have been proven to be far greater than humans over a long period of time with things like autopilot. If you've ever tried to navigate a freighter, which I have tried to do, much to my chagrin, it is not easy because if you're talking about a large ship, a minor movement can cause that ship to shift course rather dramatically over time. And because you're dealing with a lot of mass, my course, once I took over from the autopilot, looked like a big lazy S as opposed to the straight line the autopilot had as soon as it was turned back on again. So autonomous machines have proven to be much more effective in a number of ways, even in their nascent form now. And I expect by the end of the century, we're going to have a new appreciation for those machines, which will have taken over lots of the jobs that are currently unsafe for people. Mining, for instance, space exploration is largely going to be machine driven. And as much as Elon Musk wants to send people to Mars, Mars is largely a planet, as far as we know, populated by robots at the moment. So there are no people on it, though it would be sure fun to find out there are Martians, but unlikely. So in the end, my position is autonomous machines in all their glory, everything from their military use to their civilian use to their personal use, everything from cleaning our homes to assisting with the disabled, driving us to and from work, will vastly change the amount of time we have for leisure, for work, and bring into question whether or not we even need people in a lot of jobs where people are currently employed. And the pandemic did something rather dramatic to this segment, showcasing that autonomous equipment can be used to displace or replace workers for worker shortages, and in areas where the pandemic has been problematic, like in foods. Suddenly fast foods is all over autonomous machines, where it wasn't even remotely economical in the past because they can't staff. And it's better to pay more for something and have that business run than have that business shut down. I can tell you where I live, there are empty storefronts all over the place, or restaurants haven't made it, not because they can't afford to stay open, because they just can't get the people to keep the restaurants open. Even this last weekend, I tried to buy a taco at Taco Bell here, and both Taco Bells were closed due to lack of staffing. And that's what's really driving the interest in autonomous machines in foods, and likely driving them now more aggressively in areas where they were no longer successful. So for me, autonomous machines, I think, will turn out to be the biggest have the biggest technological impact in the 21st century.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Thank you, Professor Sharif and Tatsuno, to join today's sessions. Our today's debate topic is what was the most important invention of the 21st century? Now I request our honorable speaker, Professor Donald.
Well, you got to realize that the iPhone wasn't invented until 2007. So basically, our communication devices that like, I can't walk out of the house without my phone, my mobile device, my incredibly powerful computer that I have with me at all times. I don't think most people can anymore. So that's an invention of the 21st century, a very recent invention. And so if we wanted to look at what the most important invention of the 21st century is so far, I think most of us would agree, hands down, that is it. It's the basis for most of the other things that we're doing. We can do everything we want with artificial intelligence, virtual reality, all of the other things, but it's not going to be of much use unless we have our phones, our mobile devices that allow us to communicate. And of course, with that goes the powerful networks that have been built and are being built, the 5G networks that make the time for our communication just instant, very, very fast. When you ping, it gets from 40 milliseconds down to 1 or 2 milliseconds, which is a huge difference. Where are we going to go in the future? I don't agree with Rob about autonomous machines and autonomous. I think that we will get there. We might get there this century. We might not. It's something that we absolutely have no idea how to do. So when we say we're going to do something like that, it's great to say to imagine that we're going to do it, but if we have absolutely no idea how to do it, it's hard to gauge when that breakthrough is going to happen. We've been trying to cure cancer forever, and I'm sure we'll, for a long time, and I'm sure we'll do it eventually. But when is that breakthrough going to happen that's going to allow us to do that? It's hard to predict. I'm sure it'll happen. I'm sure eventually we'll be able. And the basic problem is that computers are so bad at logic, and we don't know how to get them to have the kind of logic that we use continuously through the day, which is called abductive reasoning. And that's the ability to form hypotheses and guess why something happened. When something happens, we see Bob and Robert walking down the street together. And Bob and Robert had a falling out, and they were so mad at each other they wouldn't talk to each other. And there we see them walking down the street together, and we think to ourselves, oh, they must have resolved their difficulties. Now they're talking to each other again. Just our minds, we just do that. We know, we form hypotheses like this. We may be wrong. I mean, they may be talking to each other because they had some business thing, and they're trying to separate the business interests and really make sure that they never have to see each other again. I mean, that could be, our guess may be wrong, but we make those guesses. And when we're driving, we have to make guesses like that all the time. We're looking at somebody and we're guessing that this person is going to wait for us while we go through the intersection. We're guessing that this person is going to go when we go through the intersection. We're constantly making these guesses. And we have no idea how to program these guesses into the computer. None. Zero. The computers, if I say, Mary helped Sally with her homework and she appreciated it, and then we ask, did Mary appreciate Sally or did Sally appreciate Mary? The computers cannot answer that question. They get it as much as random chance. So they can't understand the most basic language that we understand, and we have no idea how to get them to do it. So I don't see, until we have a breakthrough with that, I don't really see how we're going to be able to have autonomous machines or autonomous. We're not going to have like robots that are clean our houses and things like that. That's not going to happen. So what is going to happen? Well, I think we ought to look at technology from a different point of view. There's other technology that's happened. One example is in 2000, they first started the discipline of positive psychology, and it revolutionized psychology. Freudian psychology and various kinds of psychology really didn't work very well. Somebody with depression, anxiety, various kinds of problems, they didn't really have a way of helping them. And when positive psychology, up until that point, they've been looking at pathology and psychology. Why does this person have a problem? And 2000 was the beginning of the discipline of positive psychology, where they formally started looking at why people are happy, why people are successful, why people are healthy, why they're mentally healthy. And they started studying that. And once they started studying that, they looked at people and they figured out ways of finding a person who's not doing well and changing and getting them to do the things that people do well do. And after they started doing that, they found ways of getting people with anxiety, depression, other kinds of problems like that, and actually changing their behavior so that they wound up being happy, being successful, and doing things in ways that help them. And that's something that changes human life. And when we look at things like that, our world is in a place that's kind of scary, because the way that information is in the internet, social networks, and things like that, reality is dissolving. People don't know what's true anymore. People don't know how to have judgments about reality. I mean, in the United States, some incredible number of people, like a quarter, believe that the election was stolen, but they have no basis for it. If you ask them how they know that, they just know it. It's their gut. And the reason that they know it is because there's Fox News and all these various kinds of things that tell them that over and over and over again. How can we do something about that? How can we make it so that people start having a shared reality again? I mean, I think that we will. I think we'll figure out ways to do that. And I think things like positive psychology give us a direction that we can do to start making the world a place where people communicate with each other and get together and are happier and healthier and all the kinds of things that, make the world a better place. And I think we're going to be able to do that. And I think that is going to be the biggest technology of the 21st century.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Now I request Professor Sheridan Tatsuno for today's debate.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I'm Sheridan Tatsuno from San Francisco. I'm born and raised in Silicon Valley, so I'm kind of hardcore Silicon Valley, but I'm trained in urban and environmental planning. And what I'd like to do today is provide this big overview, because we studied cities going back 20,000 years in urban planning, and we go out. I was at Bechtel, we go out 250 years when we plan big infrastructure projects. So I tend to take the long view of things and look at major transitions. So historically, what I see is we move from the mechanical industrial age from the 1900s. And then in 1950, with computers and space, we got into the tech age, which is electrical engineering, computer science, Silicon Valley, AI, and now VR and autonomous vehicles. And those will always continue because we build incrementally on top of old technologies. We'll replace them, but we still adopt them. So with the AI and VR will not go away, they'll just evolve. So that's what's going on there. And then as for the use of technology, I think one of the false dichotomies is AI versus humans. But that's a false dichotomy, because if you look at any banking system, I don't think any bank just has their AI systems trying to beat the hackers who have AI systems. It's usually AI teams, people and AI teams against teams with AI. So you have humans plus AI against humans and AI in any banking or security system. So I think that's a false dichotomy. And I do think that AI, though, and I do agree in autonomous vehicles, I'm an urban planner, you don't want to put it in crowded place with children running around. That's the worst place, okay? Because it's called serendipity problem. You have, surprises. I do think it would be useful because, for example, for trucking, long distance trucking, you could just do it on autonomously. Now, the danger is when they come to the big cities. So one thing you could do is have turn the cabin into an office so that the trucker could have a second job doing his home office inside the truck. And then when they approach the city, take over. Just like a pilot puts it on autopilot. And when they approach cities, they take control again. So the same thing as the airlines. They've been doing this for decades. So I think autonomous vehicles is going to help reduce the stress on drivers and pilots and people like that, and extend the opportunity. So I think we're going to use AI now. So AI, for example, is useful for and VR for dangerous, dirty, boring, costly jobs, right? So for example, you don't want humans walking around in nuclear power plants, right? Ideally, you want a robot with telepresence, with AI systems, doing all the measurements, and then humans monitoring it. So it's kind of it's an AI human team. So I think that's really where I see that going. Now, going into the future, and I tend to look out in technology 5 to 20 years, because I did the emerging technology program at DataQuest, and we were looking at all chip design-ins, and so all the different vertical sectors like medical, automotive. So if you really look at where we're going, and I think what's happening, and people don't realize it yet, is that COVID is forcing our hand. Climate change is forcing our hand. And humans are very creative, innovative people. We're not going to take these things lying down. We're going to respond with, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So we're going to see a huge explosion in creativity, innovation coming out of all sectors of the world. And I believe we're entering the bio era, the bio renaissance. So if you look back in history, the Black Death, 1347 to 51, 3 years, everything shut down. And if you read Boccaccio's Decameron, the opening scene, the introduction, basically describes the world in the last 2 years. Total disorder, chaos, economy shut down, people dying. I mean, it's very similar. Human nature hasn't changed from what I can see. What happened, though, if you really look at it carefully, is during and after, many of the artists and people left the cities and went to countries and just sat there and looked at nature and painted. So that's why Da Vinci and others always said, all art is based on nature. And it was not only natural environment, but also the human. So that's why he did anatomical studies, which became the basis for physiology. So what happened after the Black Death is there was this cultural renaissance about 50 to 100 years later. And you had a scarcity of labor because a lot of people died. And so what happened is that you had this big boom. Now, I think we're going to see the same thing, because humans don't just sit there and do nothing, okay? Because we're very curious people. We like to do things. We want to do meaningful work. And I think robots are going to save us from all the boring stuff, frankly. But the things that we need to focus on, I think, is going to be the future is bioengineering. And what I mean by this is the integration of the mechanical era for like robots and things like that with electrical engineering, computer science, software, so the full stack. But bio, which is, it could be protein engineering, COVID research, all of that. So that's coming. And I think that bioengineering will be a hot new degree. And in terms of permaculture, botany is one of the hot degrees now, not MBAs. So we need, because of food shortages now worldwide, everybody's saying we can't rely on imported food by big corporations or, Ukraine. We have to start growing our food locally, otherwise we're going to starve. So it's going to be necessity, not luxury, to grow your own food. In other words, Victory Gardens, do we survive or not? And I think that's going to drive a huge amount of innovation. So ag tech across the board is going to explode worldwide. And especially in California right now, we have drought. So everybody's saying, gee, the vineyards like Napa Valley are going north into Canada now, into the cooler climates, but even they're hot. And what happens to Napa Valley, what happens to California agriculture is half of it turns to desert. How do we reclaim the land, or do recycled water, or how do we, so we have to look at Israel. They're experts on xeriscaping. Xeriscaping, or also drip irrigation. So that kind of innovation for agriculture. So I think I tend to be very optimistic about the future in terms of innovation. I think there's going to be a Cambrian explosion basically coming in all fields, so not just bio. It's going to be computer science, engineering, mechanical, everything. And tapping into this, I agree with Don that this whole notion of sentience, in other words, when you sit back and look at nature when it's in COVID, you have a lot of time to think. We're not busybodies like we used to be. And I think that reflection, the deep thinking, is what's going to drive the innovation, not this kind of doing busy work. And I think this whole notion of sentience has to be revisited, which means what does it mean to be human? How are humans different from robots? What does this, so there's a whole thing about consciousness tech. It's kind of the extension of the singularity and AI and stuff like that. But it's not based on just tech robots, which is the Hollywood view, a dystopian view. It's more about wellness. And so my company, actually, I'm working with a Dutch company. doing AI. We have avatars, 2D avatar. We're doing 3D, but we're going to be working with a mental wellness group or mental health group. They've got 100 million members, and they're addressing all the big issues: depression, fear, and all these things that we have today. So I think that's why I agree with Don, and I actually agree with everybody who spoke so far. We're not going to leave all the technology behind. We're going to bring it with us into the future. And we're going to integrate it into new types of systems. So it's kind of like being a car builder. So when you're a car builder, you design a car, you say, what are you going to design? Is it a truck, a roadster, whatever, EV or mobility? What's the functionality? And then you say, and we're not going to just, restrict ourselves to one thing. We're going to look at all the different technology components and say, what's the best solution for the problem we're trying to solve? So I think humans tend to be very pragmatic in that sense, in both grassroots, innovators, as well as corporate. But anyway, so that's kind of my view of where we're headed. I think I tend to be very optimistic. And one final thing, this whole thing about science and no facts, and there was a study done by Carnegie Mellon, psychologist, and they showed that 85% of our personal success or failure has to do with our EQ, our emotional quotient, not our IQ. But we spend 99% of our time on IQ in schools. And people who are really smart, like at Stanford, can't understand why people are so emotional. They should go to the psychology department, which can explain to them, most people, even Wall Street traders, think 90% with their emotions. It's called fear and greed. And so Trump brought that out. And actually, Trump understood that principle. Unfortunately, so did Hitler, that fear is a big driver. He played on the emotions and the fear, not the logic or the science. And that's why, Hillary was really a wonkish person, real IQ, but she was only addressing 15% of or 10% of our actual decision making. So anyway, so I think in the future, if we focus more on figuring, and I agree with Don, how do we leverage our sentience and our emotions, and then combine it with our AI and our IQ? That's the tricky part, because we're humans, we're not machines. We can't just program people, unless we brainwash them. So that's the hard part. Anyway, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sheridan Tatsuno. Now rebuttal round. First, I request Professor David Smith.
Sharif, I agree with most of what was said. I think we're in a time of dramatic change and going, but let me just go ahead and throw a few of mine out to kind of set the positions, a little bit of rebuttal. The movement towards autonomous, it is going to be ground changing, not just though in autonomous vehicles. We're beginning to see it being used in many different places. And once we begin to go to the point where we as humankind can trust machines and trust artificial intelligence to do many of the things that we believe requires human input today, it's going to change the world as we're going there. Will that happen soon? No. But if I look at the latter part of this century, I think we will see a time where a true autonomous things begin to play. A couple people have really gone back and talked about mobile devices. And I think the definition of mobile devices are going to change as we go forward. But if I were to look at where we are in the world today, the application of mobile devices, which takes the system of systems context and gives us where we are today. I mean, the use of mobile devices, for example, in Ukraine, has totally changed of how the world sees war. It's totally changed on how we can even track an adversary, where citizens now have the power that large nation states had in the past of transmitting location, of transmitting video, of doing data in real time wherever they are. So we're going to continue to see this mobile device paradigm advance, but it will go beyond what we call our mobile phones today and will dramatically morph. This one's a little bit further out, but today we can teleport atoms and molecules today. We're still a long ways from doing it with a living being. But towards the end of this century, we're going to see leaps and bound advances in teleportation. And I believe that towards the end of this century, and probably shortly after the middle, we're going to see teleportation applied to manufacturing, to where we can teleport in materials, raw materials and things that we can use in our manufacturing process, and maybe even begin to use in the delivery process to consumers and customers that way. And I believe teleportation will be one of the things that we will see come to being in this century. One of the biggest things I see of the last 22 years of this century is the fact that we now live in a digitized, connected world. And it has really, in my mind, revolutionized a lot of what we're doing. But I think we're going to continue to see this connected world, this digitized world, extend even beyond places where we see it today. And some of the things that Sheridan was talking about, that Rob and Donald have talked about, really take this concept of this ubiquitous connectivity, this ubiquitous digitalization forward. And that's going to be a key development of what's important during the next part. I really have, I think, 2 or 3 more, but one of them that's going to have profound impact is not in the way we see it today, but the movement towards cryptocurrencies is going to be a real important outcome of the century. One of the defining objects of nation states is that they have the ability to manipulate the currency in their nation. And they use it to control inflation. They use it to control many different things. And so today, even with the euro, most of our monetary policy is really built around how can it support the nation states and how can that be used with its citizens. If we go to where cryptocurrencies promise, we're going to be in a global monetary system with cryptocurrencies being out of the control of governments. If that happens, that's going to be a very important output of this century. Last 2, multiple people have talked about healthcare. And I think healthcare will be advanced dramatically. I think we will see things like we saw the introduction in the last 5 years of gene editing. Well, gene editing is just the start. We will go from gene editing into also where we are now embedding sensors in the body, that ubiquitous digital communication sensor. And as we do that and take those forward, we will begin to see regenerative healthcare really dramatically extend human lifetime. And I think this trend in healthcare will be one of the major defining elements of this century. My last one, though, is going to be a little bit more controversial. I think we've seen the beginnings of this already, where education we have today hasn't changed much since the times of Socrates. We've applied technologies to help it. We've applied other ways to when printing was invented, it helped move it forward. The computer has helped it move it forward. But we begin to see now that education has to fundamentally change to keep up with the pace of life today, to keep up with globalization, to be able to understand that as we as humans extend our ability to live longer, and that we're going to be going increasingly through educational changes where we have to relearn, we have to update our skills, we have to transition probably into all of the new areas that these technology innovations, these societal innovations, and others are charging. So really the top of my list, and I cannot define where it's going to be yet, but I believe we will see this century a dramatic change in the education process. We will see less and less emphasis on doing education as separate events in our life. And we will see more education become things where we are going to begin to educate more just in time. We're going to go and educate more as we've decided as a person we want to have more. Sheridan's example of the truck driver in an autonomous vehicle running things out of the back of the cab while he's eyes off, minds off of the travel. I think we're going to see education come into a new renaissance at that point using new technologies. I even can see possibilities of beginning to take some of the things like you see Elon Musk doing with his neural imprints down the road and being applied. But I think the biggest thing is we will see education revolutionize during this, and will be almost indistinguishable from we advancing as humans, where today we see education as a totally separate process and a totally separate institution. You know, when we started, before we were on air, we were discussing some of the things like boot camps and short education things. I just did a quick search, and so if I go to at a university, a short course on cybersecurity, the average price I saw for that short course on cybersecurity was $40,000 to $80,000 for a short course. I looked at the short boot camp to accomplish the same cybersecurity, not in a university. I just looked in Austin, for example. The average cost for a boot camp on cybersecurity between $15,000 to $18,000. Boy, if I can get the same information out of that type of environment versus going to university short course with that much different price, that is just a precursor how I believe we're going to see education changing. So, Sharif, I think that is my list. I agree with everything that was said with the other speakers, but I just kind of go back and go, gee, we're going to have some things that are incremental advances. Autonomous vehicles is an incremental advance. Where we're going with the mobile devices, where we're going with that. But the one other thing that really thinks will have a huge impact is by the end of the century, we should be a multiplanetary species. And we're going to take that, and once we as humans become multiplanetary and live on other worlds, that will also take our sense of innovation. That will take our sense of discovery and of being pioneers again. And I think that will be actually one of the greatest accomplishments, not necessarily invention, but one of the greatest accomplishments that we will have during this century. So Sharif, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Now I request our honorable speaker, Professor Rob, for rebuttal and concluding remarks.
Sure. Back to my selection, which was autonomous machines. Some of the pushback was on sentience, and sentience is an interesting question, but it's not required for autonomy. The autonomous machines that are currently under trial, I think you could argue none of them are sentient. Though our concept of sentience is changing. The EU has previously designated all vertebrate animals as sentient, and most recently, identified invertebrates as sentient. Octopus, in particular, has been identified as a sentient creature, showcasing that we have a changing view of what sentience should be. But Donald also pointed out, though incorrectly, that artificial intelligences can't infer answers. There's actually an entire school of thought and shipping products in the GAN area, and GANs are generative adversarial networks, and they use two neural networks pitted against each other, and they've been used to outperform things like forensic artists and in production. The use of use of GANs is now becoming pretty widespread. In fact, if there are trials up on NVIDIA's site of several types of GANs that can allow you, with no artistic capability, to create photorealistic pictures artistically, because the computer infers what it is you want to create and then creates it for you, closing the gaps. GANs have also been used very effectively in guessing people's passwords of late. Been much more effective than other tools, and clearly outperformed humans in that regard, in terms of their effectiveness, and depending on the information that they've received. And so it does showcase that we can develop computational capabilities, artificial intelligences that can infer answers as we go forward. I disagree with David Smith in terms of people going into space. As we advance autonomous machines, it just makes much more sense to send the machines into space, as we've been doing. The number of machines with various degrees of autonomy that we've launched into space and onto various planets vastly exceed the number of people that we put there. And it's just because space is very hostile to people. The micrometeorites, radiation exposure, Musk has been honest, at least with one aspect of the Mars mission, that every human that goes to Mars as part of his concept will likely die there, because there is no return trip, and at least right now Mars does not support life. It's shown that it can, but it does not, and the difference between a human on Mars versus a machine on Mars is becoming less and less distinct. As these computerized capabilities come forward, we have a number of autonomous machines that are in final trial. The autonomous cars are not over the horizon. They've been announced for the 2025 model year. Though 2026, if you're going to buy one, would be the year, because that's going to be the second generation that will come 1 year after the first. Full autonomy isn't expected to 2030. But the autonomous vehicles in 2025, which will include autonomous trucks, will be fully capable of driving in most places where you currently drive, and hopefully will do a better job than the autonomy in Teslas, which was, by any stretch of the imagination, maybe a level 2+ autonomy. And recently, a Tesla just decided to run over a relatively expensive jet at an airport because it didn't recognize the jet, showcasing that what's actually shipping in production in vehicles is nothing like what's actually out there in test. The point, though, with regard to autonomous equipment is the fact that it can be incredibly disruptive, and the fact that entire skill levels, skill classifications, can and likely will be replaced by them. I mentioned fast foods is now on the short list, where it was not on the short list before the pandemic. We have the first fully autonomous factory up by BMW in Germany. It was created and first simulated in Omniverse, and then has been slowly rolled out into production. And while there are a couple folks still floating around inside the factory, most all movement and assembly is now done virtually entirely by machines, with some human oversight to catch any errors the machines don't, because it's new. But you can imagine in a couple decades that human oversight will probably no longer be needed. The reason for that, by the way, is because when you're working at machine speeds, people just don't work fast enough to correct a problem the machine makes. And so your oversight and your remediation really has to be a machine level as well, which, by the way, is something we discovered early on with the autonomous car efforts. You might recall back in the early part of the century with autonomous car testing, the view was that if an autonomous car ran into trouble, it would switch off and pass over control to the human. And almost universally in test, what that ended up in was a catastrophic accident, because the human could not, if the computer could not determine what the problem was and address it at machine speeds, the human who might be napping, reading a book, watching a movie, or doing something else entirely could not come up to speed with the problem, come up with a solution to the problem, and avoid whatever the car was headed to in the microseconds that were needed to respond. We're just not fast enough. And so currently with autonomous vehicles, any redundancy is created with another autonomous system that can step in case of failure. And that's of course called redundancy. And much of what we have in autonomous weapon systems in terms of their ability to deliver ordnance on target has to do with redundancy, the ability for them to survive and continue on mission, even if part of their technology is taken out. In terms of advanced autonomous stuff, Boeing has actually been flying their loyal wingman drone now, and it's been doing well in trials. That's a fully autonomous fighter jet that is supposed to fly in concert with human pilots and other jets, but operate autonomously when engaged in battle. And of course, in Ukraine, they've deployed the Switchblade autonomous drone in the battlefield, which is a loiter and attack, and it can, while the operator can select a target, that class of technology is capable of selecting targets all on its own and fighting autonomously, with the advantage being that it doesn't put the soldier at high risk. Often when you've got a weapon system that requires targeting or requires a soldier to keep the weapon on target, once the weapon is released, whatever he's targeting will target the soldier and eliminate them and the launch vehicle from the battlefield. But with an autonomous weapon, by the time the weapon actually locks on the target, the person that launched it is long gone. And so there is no way to go back and identify and remove the soldier. So the human is protected by the soldier. And in trial, we also have large classes. In fact, in use on the U.S. border now, we have autonomous dogs that are patrolling the border and operating independently, largely independently of their operators. And in test, the robotic dogs have showcased that they can be used to assist disabled people. They are fully capable in acting in concert with others and bringing into question what we might be able to do in the future with drone swarms, which could have collective intelligence as they're used together, and again, operate autonomously and provide some of the most interesting defenses against things like hypersonic missiles, simply by being able to obscure their pathway. The problem with hypersonic missiles is they can't turn very well. And so if you can get something in front of them, the speed of the missile hitting that whatever it is that's in front of them will likely destroy or at least disable the missile because of the kinetic forces involved. So I'm back again to thinking autonomous machines will have the biggest impact on the world in this century, only because they are already having an impact. They are engaging people in, what drivers can and cannot do. Sheridan did point out, and by the way, I was at DataQuest as well in 2024, 1994 to 1995 timeframe. But the underlying concept of the long haul trucker acting as a purser over the long haul and then taking over driving responsibilities that come into cities is certainly one of the concepts that's being considered. In some cases, though, what they're also thinking about is just swapping out, and once it comes into a city, using a more conventional tractor trailer rig, and then having just depots, long haul depots, where you have the purser security guard switch off with another tractor rig that brings us into cities. But working vehicles in cities is actually settled technology. The testing, for whatever reason, the best testing environment apparently is Israel at the moment. Where both NVIDIA and Intel have showcased that their vehicles can navigate, which is crazy traffic, in some of the most unusual places right now, which again supports the near-term launch of level 4 autonomy in the 2024-25 timeframe. By the way, level 5 autonomy is not technology constrained; it's regulation constrained, because you have to be able to allow vehicles to function fully without drivers for level 5 autonomy to take hold. And California just passed a law that will allow them to operate fully without drivers. So we are actually crossing some of these regulatory hurdles faster than the industry thought was possible. But I still don't think we're going to get to them until 2030 earliest, just because of the concerns with regard to liability still need to be resolved. Though we do have plenty of, surprisingly, somebody pointed this out to me the other day, we have plenty of case law with regard to autonomous machines that's been developed in factories, which showcases the liability flows back rather easily to the manufacturer of the equipment when it misperforms, and does not actually flow to the driver or the operator of the equipment, since you don't have an operator when a piece of equipment is working autonomously. The concern, of course, was that maybe the supervisor or management would take the liability on. But in trials, that hasn't, in settled law, that hasn't been the case. It's actually flowed back to the manufacturer. And we do have autonomous machines in use in a number of industries right now. Farming, for instance, has already rolled out, thanks to John Deere, autonomous lines of tractors. And I grew up on a farm, and and once again showcasing that not necessarily cost is the driving factor, but just getting away from some of the mind-numbing aspects of certain careers becomes important. But it's no longer at all tied. It's not at all tied to sentience. Sentience is a whole different concept, and one that is fluid at the moment. It is not clear we even know how to define sentience definitively, and clearly our existing definitions have become fluid. And I expect to become even more fluid. I've been in a number of conversations with people that argue that we've already achieved sentience with certain classes of equipment that are operating fairly autonomously, and it's just our inability to recognize that sentience is the gating factor, not our ability to create it. It does create a concern, however, that we might create something that operates not only independently of us, but in a hostile fashion against the human population, which of course is the whole basis for the Terminator series of movies. I'm not personally bought off on the fact that we've created sentience accidentally yet, but the arguments have merit, and they're worth considering. As we get towards the end of the century, though, you have to take the technology that we have today and advance it the way it's likely going to advance over the next 80 years. And as we've seen going back to the 1920s and what they were talking about then compared to what we had by the end of the centuries, I mean, the smartphones came out at the end of the century, didn't even have a concept. Robotics, however, and autonomous machines we were talking about in those prior World's Fairs early in the century, but they were all conceptualized and not particularly effective. Giant robots that scared the crap out of kids was fun, but they were largely remote controlled and not in any way autonomous. But by the end of the century, we were already going down the path of creating what it was we imagined. And even though things like flying cars, which were also conceived early off in the last century, we didn't really start getting serious about until this century. We did have flying cars in the 1940s and 1950s. They just were sucky cars, and they were sucky airplanes. So it also showcases that sometimes it takes a while for us to really refine a technology and get it to where it is. But I still think, because of its overall potential impact on the human race, that the creation of largely autonomous machines that can go in and perform, whether they be in wartime or peacetime, for defense or for civilian use, is going to have the biggest overall impact on humanity. Though I will agree with Sheridan that there is a very big likelihood that bioengineering could overlay this, and we can create a better human-machine interfaces and a blend of people machines. Talking about one of the definitions for the singularity, and there are several. A blending of human and machines being what could in fact overcome autonomous machines and any biological implementation alone. A blending of the two technologies could be incredibly compelling and actually cause us to get to that sentience level far more quickly, though with clear implications and troubling implications for religious groups, governments, and really how we would even treat those kinds of hybrids. So we're going into an area of high disruption. I think autonomous machines are going to be at the core of that disruption. But as I mentioned, we're in the 2020s. We still have another 80 years to go, and there's still a high probability that we haven't even seen what the most disruptive technology is likely going to be, with the possibility of it being that biological, mechanical hybrid that Sheridan alluded to.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Professor Donald, I'm requesting for your rebuttal and concluding remarks. Can you unmute, please?
Oh yeah, I just did. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that Rob's point is one of Rob's points is really important, which is if you look at sitting around and say 1950 or 1920, let's just say, 1921, and asking yourself the question, what's going to happen in the rest of the 20th century, I think it'd be pretty difficult to guess about, say, for instance, the internet and some of the things that have happened. And my point simply being is that it's probably true if you look at the history of history of humankind, that what the biggest technological leap will be is something that we can't even think of right now. It'll come out of the blue. It's just something that we don't even expect. And that's really cool. You know, somebody will have personal computers. Who would have thought of that in 1920? Who would have even thought of computers? I mean, we were thinking about it. A few people were, but the idea that they would be incorporated in human life. I had a friend back in the 90s who looked at me sincerely and he said, "Don, no manager will ever have a computer on his desk." He was pretty wrong now, wasn't he? But that was the thinking at the time, because at the time, if somebody wanted to use a computer, they'd write out the problem that they had. They'd hand it to somebody who would go type everything out on punch cards, run the problem, and then bring back a stack of papers that was whatever the computer happened to output based on the issues that the person had. And so they were so far from PCs that no one could even conceive of it. So anyway, that's one of my points. The other one is I love what Sheridan's doing, which is the idea that when you get in about using virtual reality for psychology, because the EA, it's the Hospital for Veterans. When you're a veteran of the military in the United States, you have the ability to use a medical care system, which is free to or I think free or very low cost for the veterans, and it's a government-run system that it varies depending on the desire of Congress to have it be good, but it's pretty good. And a lot of veterans have PTSD, psychological problems, because of what they've experienced. And one of the things that they use to help overcome that PTSD is virtual reality, because they can basically do systematic desensitization, which is kind of repeating the experience that they've had in a positive, with positive things going on at the same time. Basically, every time you remember something, you remember it differently. You remember it with the mood that you're in when you remember it. So if you can get people into a positive space and have them remember it in a positive space, it makes the memory be less painful. And so so that's just an actual concrete example of something we're doing with virtual reality that coincides with what Sheridan is saying. I just looked up what they're doing in Israel, and they call it driver assist, and they're not autonomous. They're slightly autonomous, and I was looking at how many times Elon Musk has predicted that vehicles are going to be completely autonomous. Once in 2015, he predicted they'd be fully autonomous in 2017, and they're not even close now. So I know they will. I'm sure they will be someday, but we're not very close to it now. So that's an exciting thing. It'll be great when that happens. Maybe there's a push in California to start using other technologies, because like trains and other transportation, to try and electrify our transportation system so that we'll be able to basically increase our public transportation and be able to kind of get away from using cars, because some of the consequences of using cars is that we have parking lots, and parking lots are a horrible use of space inside of cities. There's a place where there's a lot of crime. They basically you could use them for housing and stores and things like that, but they just are big empty places. And so the less dependent we get on cars, the better off we're going to be. And so there's definitely a push in California to try and make that happen. So that's a possible thing that's going to happen in the future. And then finally, I think an example of a technology that's really quite amazing is the mRNA, and that's what we use to make the COVID vaccine. And we're starting to understand and be able to model our DNA, how we manufacture proteins inside of ourselves, and that technology is going to continue to advance. And I just read they've developed a virus that fights cancer, and I think things like that are just going to keep happening, and we're going to learn more and more about our biology, and we'll be able to start basically addressing diseases directly. It's a big deal, so it's a lot more complicated than one would think. So it won't happen soon. It'll happen very incrementally over a long period of time, but that's something that's going to be happening during the 21st century, and I think we're going to see great steps towards that as time goes on. So,
Thank you. Now I request Professor Sheridan Tatsuno for rebuttal and concluding remarks.
Okay, very good. Let's see. I'd like to do the big picture first, just to put everything into context, because I tend to do that in terms of urban planning and in markets. So I think I'm writing a book about biocities to solve our problems, and I'm addressing the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It's called war, pandemics, climate change, and poverty, like food and water insecurity. Those are the big ones. And as a market researcher, we've learned in Silicon Valley over 50 years that 98% of the tech startups fail from zero, and of the venture capital funded ones, maybe 90% fail, or most of them fail, basically. In other words, it's a tech push play, and they're tech in search of a problem. On the contrast, if you do the demand side, which is why DataQuest, everybody loved us, because we were saying, what do users really want and need right now? Okay, so the success rate is typically over 85%. But the problem in Silicon Valley, we're techies and we like to push technology, IP, enforce it, but it doesn't work. All right, so the advice is very simply don't try to force technology, because it's got its own mind, and there are new technologies coming that will make it obsolete. Focus on the demand side and be good market researchers. And so right now it's war, pandemics, climate change, food, water. We call those painkillers. And we've learned in medicine, for example, people pay a lot of money for painkillers and surgery. They won't pay for vitamins as much or preventive health care. They'll just defer it until they're in ER. So we know that in human nature, we tend to react to crisis, not proact and that's our weakness as a humanity. We just wait till it's too late often. And so whenever you do solutions, always look at painkillers on the demand side. What do people need now? Must have, not nice to have, and do that. And the reason too, also on the tech side, is when you push it, Silicon Valley is known for better, faster, cheaper, but we've had this kind of amoral technology now, and AI has brought that up. So ethics is really important. So we're adding ethics to the value add in Silicon Valley. So cheaper, faster, better, and ethical. And that's going to be the big, and that gets into the whole sentience, conscious, values, and the EQ side of the fence. So if I were to look at a big leap in technology, it's more of a mind shift. That we realize that we are reactive human beings. We're emotional, not logical robots. And by the way, why try to compete against a robot when they can outthink you anyway? See, that's a fool's errand to try to beat a robot in terms of IQ, I think, because they'll do it. They're already doing it now. So I think where the humans have an opportunity is on the demand side, all the painkillers, and using our humanity, which is the EQ, and then, that comes down to things like love, trust, competence, working together, mobilization, organizing, argue, all this human-related skills, right? That's where robots are really hard. They can't do it. I mean, humans could do 100 different EQ skills that a robot can't do because you can only program one or two at a time. So otherwise, you overload the system. So I think if we focus on, I call the EQ development side of the fence, then we're in better shape. Personally, I'm just focusing more on cities because I'm an urban planner. So I'm writing a book. I'm going to release it next month on biocities and how they're going to address pandemics and in the environment, the climate age. And so I'm kind of redefining biology. So currently, biology is separated by specialists into eco or macrobiology, or microbiology, the human. And we separate the two, which is insane because anybody can tell you that a toxic city will make you sick. So the city will affect the human, and humans affect the city by infecting other people. So you can't separate the environment. So my thesis for this whole bio-renaissance is that we reconnect the human biology, like pandemics, with the cities where 80, half of us live, and why the cities, and I'll end it here. We will win or lose the climate battle in the cities because cities consume 80% of the energy, they generate 80% of the GDP, they have most of the wealth, the power, and they emit 70% of the carbon. So the Pareto rule, 80-20, focus on the 80%. And if you can figure that one out, and you can basically change the world very quickly. Now, the advantage is the C40 in the UN is already organized to do that. And then, so my book is basically, how can we get 10,000 cities up and rolling in the next several years to totally reverse engineer everything that we've done wrong? And that's not going to be easy. But what's good about it is it's going to create billions of new jobs because they don't exist yet. That's the good part. All the jobs we're talking about, all of them, they don't exist. And the reason why I say that, I was at Stanford in the engineering department in 1993, and I knew the internet was coming in January 94, commercial. And I said, I went to the business school in economics. I said, what's the future of commercial? And they said, what are you talking about? You're in the wrong department, go to the engineering department. So I went there and they said, RSA security, RSA security. I said, yeah, but that's like locks in the door for what you do inside the building. He goes, well, that's your problem. As a humanist, what will humans do? So I just said, well, I think they're going to shop. And then all my engineering friends made fun of me. They thought I was a total fool. They said, we're not going to shop online. We're not going to bastardize the internet, which is for the elites, NASA and Pentagon and us elite researchers. I said, wow, you're pretty arrogant. I said, your aunts and your kids are going to be shopping in a couple of years. And they just laughed at me. And then 4 months later, Amazon popped up and the rest is history. So one of the things I do say is that look on the demand side. In other words, don't look at the rocket scientists only. Talk to your children. They're the future anyway. And they will tell you exactly what they see coming. And if you listen to the children, you'll probably get it right most of the time. But anyway, but thank you so much.
Excellent, excellent. I believe today's sessions is very, very valuable, especially for learning. I just want to share that how world talent economy become very popular in developing world. I think last week we do a session on metaverse. Many of our speakers actually join, and you can see that universities, one of the largest universities, Chairman Sobur Khan actually joined in this session, and they heavily promoted local newspaper, national newspapers. They heavily promote our session, and there are many people actually, many thousand and thousand people actually sharing our content. They are learning, and there is a good news also. Bangladesh Honorable Prime Minister's A2I, especially she ran A2I for innovation, Energy Ministry, ICT Ministry. They actually invite us all of our speakers to collaborate with them, with the energy departments, with ICT Ministry and Prime Minister Office, and they want to organize more on the like this kind of dialogue, and they want to take action. Especially Professor Sharidan Tarsuno, you are actually urban planner, you are developing different cities. Maybe when we discuss about developing nations, in this COVID-19 situations, millions and millions of people, they left actually city. Now we are working with uplifting the village. So we are working on startup village concept. So in India, more than 100,000 people from 40 different villages, they're working with World Talent Economy Forum, and we are developing, yes, your same concept in the village, in the grassroots level people. You can reach more people, you can engage with more people, maybe you can solve more practical problem. And this is our concept. Definitely your city planning is important. Maybe you can redesign or restructures with us, with our startup village concept. So our beside that, we are publishing paper, especially with IGI Global. I know there are many famous writers with us in today's sessions. Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, Professor Donald, Sharidan Tatsuno. All of you are very famous writers. I can ensure that in IGI Global, the Economic of Talent Management and Human Capitals, we are requesting for the book chapter. Many famous organizations, central bank, as well as few countries' prime minister office also contributing for our book chapter publications. And beside that, I just want to share that next year, March 27 to 29, we have one of the largest conference in India. We already working with 15,000 scientists around the world. We will do a conference on Tesla. It's a real innovation. So you can see the BBC News. BBC actually cover our lab informations, and many famous scientists around the world. I said that more than 15,000 scientists we are communicating, including many countries' prime ministers' office, especially those who are responsible for science and innovations. We are working on these projects. BBC, our partners, and they already start promoting our event. So hopefully this kind of projects help the developing nations. We are working in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Japan, and Tokyo with B-Lab. We are working with Adelaide, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan's few million people, but our major target, grassroots level people. They are very happy. From every session, I can ensure they are learning. From every discussion, they are learning and they are growing. So that is the impact of World Talent Economy Forum, and hopefully through this kind of debate, and you will be happy, like world famous and world champion debaters in this conference, they also attend in the debate, especially Sir Sadiq Abdul Rahman. He was Minister of Malaysia, one of the youngest minister, world debate champion. Harish Natarajans, I think Harish, Professor Rob, you know him, that he do this IBM debate. Muhammad Abdul Latif, all of the world champion debaters, those who actually changing their community through their leadership, they will attend in the debate with today's debater. So that is the achievement of World Talent Economy Forum. Besides that, this Harvard Union, Oxford Union, Cambridge Union, and many famous debating union, they are working with our World Talent Economy Forum. So we are trying to develop a knowledge-based community. We need all of your support, and I can ensure those who join in World Talent Economy Forum, you are changing millions of people's life, and your contribution actually priceless, and definitely all of you will be part of the history. Thank you, bye-bye, and take care.